part of ultra running. As we seek the buckles, the finish lines, and the crazy distances, we experience a lot of failure along the way too. I'm Heidi.
And I'm Michelle, and we're both ultra runners and ultra running coaches who want to know more about the dreaded DNF, how, when, and why they happen, but more importantly, how we learn, we move forward, and we get back up to run again.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Run That Again, the show where we talk about DNFs, the hard races in ultra running, and all that encompasses how we learn, grow, and just, continue to run. Have on our show today Alyssa Lieb. She is a registered dietitian. She has her own nutrition business that specializes in mountain sports specifically. And she is an ultra runner and all around cool person who puts out a lot of great content that's really helpful. I'm really excited to welcome her to the show. So welcome, Alyssa.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is definitely like a different kind of podcast than I'm used to doing. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. I mean, we love talking about the nutrition aspect of things too. I'm sure that's what you are used to going on and talking about things. We're definitely going to lean into like your personal experience and mindset with, your personal experiences with running and DNFs. So yeah, it'll be fun to kind of dive into that side of things. Alyssa, we normally start the show with kind of getting a background of our guests. And so we just kind of want to know how you into running, kind of came to the niche of like helping mountain sports nutrition. That's a really like specialized thing that I think is just really fascinating. So if you could kind of give us a background into yourself.
Yeah. Let's go spending the next like 3 hours just talking about I guess
we're here for it.
Long story short, I guess, is that I grew up playing soccer. I joined my middle school track team because all my friends were doing it, and they told me that you got this really cool warm-up jacket if you did it, and I really wanted that. That was kind of my first experience with like running for the sake of running outside of the context of like we're going to do laps around the soccer field. And it was really cool. Like I was kind of fast and like really enjoyed it. In retrospect, I wish that my middle school coaches have been like, hey, like you're like a very mediocre soccer player. You should run track in high school. But alas, they did not. So I ran track in middle school and then really like didn't do a whole lot of running until I got to college and was no longer playing soccer and just kind of like felt lost and was like, okay, well, I need something to do. Like, hey, I enjoyed running back in the day. Let's do that again. Got really into like road running at that point for a couple of years. And I made all of the mistakes that a basic, beginner road runner who knows nothing made. Like I did all of my runs too fast, even though I thought I was doing it all right. I was like, I'm going to do a tempo run tomorrow. But then it was like every single run I did was a tempo run. And that all kind of coincided with it's an eating disorder when I was in college. And so I sort of had this like side-by-side thing where I really enjoyed running. Like it was giving me like a great purpose that I didn't have since I didn't have soccer anymore. And I really enjoyed it, but it was like very much feeding into my eating disorder. And then the long story short of that is I ended up under fueling and got what I now realize was absolutely a bone injury. That took me out of running for about 5 years. I went to endless doctors and was just trying to figure out like what the heck is going on. Got like several misdiagnoses, like got treated for tendinitis for a while, which it was absolutely not tendinitis. And I pretty much at that point was like, okay, well, I guess I'm never going to run again. So I got to find some other stuff to do. And in that interim, I moved to Colorado. I got really, really into hiking. I kind of grew up hiking. Like I grew up on like an Appalachian Trail town, basically. So like grew up hiking, but really leaned into it once I moved to Colorado, started rock climbing. And when I was sort of involved in those sports, like I guess that was kind of my main entry into this sort of mountain sports community. And, I just started to sort of somewhere along the line, I like recovered from my eating disorder, became like acutely aware of just how prevalent underfueling and disordered eating is in hiking, in mountaineering, in climbing, in trail running,
Absolutely.
all of the things. And I also hated my career at that point. It was like the perfect storm of like terrible things that happened to me. Back to school to become a dietitian, and was like, this is what I want to do. I want to help other, mountain athletes to not go down the same path that I went down and not end up injured and out of their sport for 5 years. And then, and then also around that time was when I sort of said, well, it's been 5 years and like nothing I've done has helped my foot feel better. So I may as well start running again. And so, so then at that point, I, had this background in like hiking and climbing. And so it was just natural to kind of be more on trails. I also found that it hurt my foot a lot less, to be honest, on purpose. So, I think that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
That's really, really cool. I feel like a lot of times, or dietitians I've talked to have like been dietitians and then kind of leaned into whatever niche they want. But it was like finding the mountain sports and like the lack of nutrition expertise and like since there is what led you to even become a dietitian to begin with. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds.
I think I'd be lying if I said that was like the only reason, but that was definitely, when I had the like, what do I want to do? Well, it's, it's obvious. I want to help other people, who are in a similar boat that I have been in.
Yeah.
Definitely sounds like a major journey of self-discovery. Especially, I always think it's fascinating to hear about people who start running on roads. And it sounds like you were really pounding pavement, probably really hard, really fast for a long time that just compounded with like the underfueling and led. Yeah. But it's so common. I feel like it's so common. I wish more people would talk about it. Yeah. So I love and respect and appreciate that you dove into this niche.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I think it's getting better, right? There are more people talking about it, but I'm in a few like running Facebook groups and, sometimes I see posts and I'm like, oh, this is great. I love to see this. But sometimes I see posts and I'm like, this is horrifying. Like, how does this still happen? So,
yeah, it's a lot of times people never really correlate the nutrition aspect to injury as well. And I feel like that's such a missing component so much of the time that I wish more people would understand.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people, their introduction to running is because they pick it up because they're trying to lose weight. And so by doing that, you are automatically in a situation where you're under fueling. And, a lot of people when they start are like me, they have no idea what they're doing. They're doing everything too fast. They're not eating enough to support that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is really common.
So go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, even now, like, I feel like there's so much misinformation. There's been a lot of discussion the last couple weeks, not to totally go off on a tangent, but just to mention it, about Red S and the legitimacy of that as a syndrome. And it is really interesting. And I think there's such a connection. And as we talk to folks often about ultra running or any endurance effort, whether it's a mountain sport, whatever your distance, there's such a correlation between fueling and performance, but also just mood and how it feels and how your recovery goes and your ability to sustain the effort, especially when you're doing efforts again and again and again.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that on this show. I mean, it's come up a lot too, just eating and fueling enough and how that keeps your brain able to think, because like your basic cognition and being able to decision make and think properly in ultra running, and I'm sure it's the same for, long effort hikes and all these other mountain sports that you're helping people through. But if you're not fueling, your ability to actually think through decisions you have to make and stuff, it goes out the window. Like you need it for that cognition, in these sports. And I don't think a lot of people put those pieces together either.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is something I talk with a lot of like rock climbers and mountaineers about, but it's, it's certainly relevant in the context of running. But, if you're in a situation where if you fell and that would not be good, and you're underfueled and your brain is not working, you're going to miss, tying the right knot, or
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
you're going to tumble. Like it's pretty high consequence. And I agree. I think a lot of people don't really quite put two and two together about that connection.
And once you're behind, it's hard to sometimes realize you're behind, or sometimes like get back into a rhythm with fueling. So I feel like you get behind and sometimes it's too late, like you're too far gone at a certain point. And I've never really thought about that, mountaineering and like rock climbing sports, and like how high stakes that is.
Oh my God, yeah. Where every thought, every decision has massive consequences.
When you're trail running, yes, you have to make sure you don't like fall down the side of a mountain, but like mostly it's like just pick your feet up and don't trip and fall. But but that's a lot of thinking that you have to be able to do if it's second nature to you. Like still being able to think through things properly is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, we can start. I know you were excited to talk about like different things today because this is a different format podcast than you're used to coming on. So we can kind of lean away from the nutrition aspect, although Michelle and I are probably like loading all sorts of nutrition questions in our minds.
Happy to answer them. And yeah, I know my own experience.
We can lean into why you came on the podcast today. Can you like tell us a little bit about like your experience? I know you have a couple of races that you want to talk about that you've experienced recently, but like your experience with ultra running. And I'd love to hear like about how those other sports that you like to do, those mountain sports, have kind of like played into your journey with like ultra running and like your training and stuff with that. Like, are they still a part of what you do consistently? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think I'll start with that because I think that kind of sets the stage for, a lot of what we're going to talk about today. I am a pretty mediocre runner. I'm a terrible downhiller. I'm pretty good at going uphill, and I really, really like it. So I am an uphill person. Sort of as a result, like the races that I seek out are ones that tend to have like quite a bit of vert. My most recent race, which, I think is kind of the main one that we're going to talk about today, called the Rut up in Big Sky, Montana. And it's one of those kind of like running festival type situations where they have like, a ton of different distances over the course of like a 3-day weekend. And so I originally came across the Rut because I was really interested in doing a vertical kilometer, which for anyone who isn't aware, it's a VK is basically you gain a kilometer of elevation in like the shortest distance possible. So it's like a really common race format in like Europe, but there's not a whole lot of them in the US. I think there's like
there's less opportunities probably here.
Yeah, which I think makes sense because our mountains are just like a lot less rugged.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I found the Rut. They are like one of the few VKs in the US, and it's like 3,600 feet of climbing in 2.7 miles. I found that. I was like, this is awesome.
That's so badass.
So then I start thinking, and I'm like, okay, like that's, kind of a far way to go to do a 3-mile race. Like, and so I start looking at some of the other distances they have. And I was like, well, they've got a 50K on Sunday. Like I could do the VK on Friday, do the 50K on Sunday. Their 50K is also like super rugged mountain race, has 10,000 feet of climbing, which I also was like, that sounds awesome. Let's go uphill. And I'm reading more, and I find that they have this thing called the Trifecta. So you do the VK on Friday, you do the 50K on Sunday, and then in between on Saturday, you do a 28K, which is, I think it was like 7,500 feet of climbing. So like the whole weekend.
It's a lot of climbing.
Yeah.
And it's not just climbing, because I peeked at the website for this event series. And it is described as, people can't see my air quotes, a true mountain course with extremely steep and technical sections, many of which involve significant exposure and rockfall hazard. And it says like in several places on the website about how significant the risk of death is. Like, it's not just in the waiver when you register, it's like right there in the course description. So just to set the stage a little bit.
Yeah,
it's really technical.
There were a few times in the race where I got to a section and I was just like, this is the middle of a race and we're doing this.
Wow.
Crazy stuff. But yeah, so I think that was sort of like my stoke. And so prior to this, just to kind of give you like a little background into like my ultra experience, I decided to sign up for this race. I had done a trail marathon that was pretty hilly. I did the Leadville Marathon last year. And then 2 years ago, I did the 4-pass loop in Colorado, which is just like a route that comes out to, it's like 28, 29 miles, I think. And it's like a really popular backpacking route. And so I had done that in a day a couple years ago. And so like, that was it. So I was like, well, like my first ever 50K is going to be day 3 of this like 3-day situation.
Wow.
Ended up that kind of like peer pressured into signing up for this race, the Jemez Mountain Trail Races 50K in New Mexico, which ended up being this May. So I ran that race. So it was not my first attempt at a 50K. I had one under my belt, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, and then I did like one other like longer, like 27-ish mile training run in Colorado. But like that was kind of it. So it was like I knew it was going to be like kind of a big thing going into it and like being tired on day 3. But I was like very stoked at the prospect of doing a lot of climbing.
That's fantastic. And this is Big Sky, Montana. So yeah, I feel like folks should go look up photos of this area and this course to really get a feel for it.
Yeah, and I had like a vague idea because I've skied at Big Sky and like there's like the whole mountain is just like a giant pile of scree. Like it's just like loose rock everywhere. And like even from skiing there, like there were just like rocks on top of the snow. Like that's how loose the whole mountain is.
Wow.
So I kind of knew what I was getting into, but like I also in many ways kind of didn't.
So talk to us about that race then. So you did the first day, Friday. Kind of talk us through like the whole challenge.
Yeah. So the VK was almost entirely off trail. We basically just started at the base of the ski mountain and took like the straightest line to the top. It's all just on kind of like grassy ski slopes for the most part until you hit about the halfway point, a little further than that. So the top 1.1 miles has 2,000 feet of elevation gain. And there's a trail, I'm doing air quotes because that's like a very generous word for what it is, but you are basically just like climbing up the scree, like you're on all fours for parts of it. There is, so like the really scary pictures that you'll see, it's this area called Bone Crusher Ridge. And it is like, I think it might be like the top of their Via Ferrata or something. There were like climbing bolts that I was like stepping over, which was a little concerning. So you're like going literally like on all fours. Oh, it also snowed the night before that day.
Of course it did.
Oh my gosh. What is like the elevation of that mountain?
Summit is, I think it's 11,700 feet. It might be 10,700. So it's somewhere in that range, which like for me in Colorado, like that's not very tall, but yeah, I know for, a lot of people, like I ran with a guy from Texas for a while and, he was like, oh, the altitude is killing me, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're like going up this ridge. There's snow. It's like a little slippery. And you get to like kind of the top section and they've thrown a climbing rope down. So you can literally like grab the rope to help you.
Oh my gosh.
Up.
I'm looking at photos now. I had to pull up some photos of it. This is nuts.
It was
crazy.
Awesome. And then, I finished in like a complete whiteout. By the way, went like exactly as expected. Like I did like pretty well. which I kind of expected, like despite the snow. But yeah, finished in like a total whiteout. They like made everybody pack a jacket in their drop bag. And then like we all got our drop bags at the top, because like if you get to the top and you're sweating and now it's like below freezing and snowing, like not a good situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we rode the tram down. It was like just a very cool way to end a race on top of a mountain,
Yeah.
and like ride down in style. So
That is super cool. That must have been so satisfying to get to the top of that. Like 2,000 feet of gain in a mile on loose scree and snow, like
Yeah.
crawling to get to the rope to pull yourself up to the top. Like that's intense.
it was awesome. Like I knew that I would enjoy this format, but I don't think I realized how much I would enjoy it. Like it was all I could talk about for the rest of the day. It was just like how cool it was. And like I'm still here talking about how cool it was.
That is so
That is
cool.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So then day 2, how are you feeling going into the second day?
I felt pretty okay going into day 2. I was like a little sore, but you know, the VK was short enough that it didn't like totally wipe me, which is great. But day 2 kicked my butt. It was, so I said it was 28K, which is like 18 miles. And then it had 7,500 feet of elevation gain. So like we were just constantly climbing and descending. And I think that was sort of the part I was the most concerned about. Like I'm a good uphiller, but I knew the downhills were going to wreck me. So we kind of go around early on. We had this like straight up a ski hill situation, which was interesting. And then we kind of looped around the mountain. It's really cool. Big Sky is like a huge mountain. And so to be able to kind of go all the way around it and like see all of the different sections of it in a day was so awesome. But there was this next part where it was like the first part where I remember going, wow, this is in the middle of a race. Like what is happening here? But we were kind of climbing up this grassy slope and I heard this like clicking noise in the distance. And I was like, what is that? Is there like rock fall? Like, what is that noise? And it was just constant. And then we come around the corner and the trail immediately goes into this giant scree field that's probably like half a mile across. And I realized the clicking noise is the sound of everybody in front of me walking across the scree and all of the rocks like tapping each other.
Wow.
It was very cool. And also like, what is happening?
My gosh.
Yeah. So at that point, there was a bottleneck. And at that point, I didn't realize why. But basically, through the scree field, you kind of like go up and gain a ridge. And like we were, coming to like a standstill on the way up this ridge, which I'm kind of afraid of heights. So I was like, okay, just don't look down the mountain. It's going to be all right.
Oh my God. Like I just had a little palpitation at the idea of being in this precarious, like on the edge, like trying to get and like sort of stuck.
Like,
Just waiting.
In Zion a little over a month ago, and I don't have a whole lot of experience with like West Coast like mountains and stuff, and I did Angel's Landing. So with like you're describing this, I'm like picturing Angel's Landing with loose rocks in a race format, and I'm like, that's drops on either side on like a ridge, like yeah, terrifying.
So this section I think was not that way, but certainly like Bone Crusher Ridge, I would say,
yeah,
sort of meets that criteria.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. So finally we like gain this ridge. And of course I'm like in this like race mindset where I'm like, well, I'm great at going uphill. So like, why am I like, stopped right now? This is frustrating, but there's like nowhere to pass because it's just this like kind of precarious, like, you step off the trail and you're going to keep sliding down forever.
Yeah.
So we finally get up there and I see why the bottleneck has happened. And it's because there's this little like third class technical down climb. Once you gain the ridge, you have to like climb down a little and then you like stay ridge proper for a while. And like anyone who has ever done anything in the mountains with me knows that is like my nightmare. Like I can go up whatever, but like technical down climb, not my jam. Of course I get up there and I'm like apologizing to everyone behind me. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be really slow, but it doesn't make sense for me to let you pass because there's a line of 200 people behind me. Like, I'm not going to let you all pass. Like, sorry.
Yeah, you gotta go eventually.
Yeah.
like, make my way down here. It's going to be okay. It was one of those things where you're like turning and facing the like rock basically, so that you're kind of like down climbing that way. And it was wet because it had snowed the day before and then had like melted. So
Wait, you had to turn around like when you're going down a ladder?
yeah,
You know how you turn around on a ladder?
yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who were facing out, but that's not my jam. So I'm like making my way down, and then these two dudes like come out of nowhere from behind me and are just like cruising down, like trying to pass me in this section. And it was like really sketchy. They're like kicking rocks down. I was like, guys, this is not really an appropriate time to pass. Like, we're like mid pack at this point. Like, you're not going to win the race. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Like 30 seconds. Anyway, so I make it down that section, and then like you go along the ridge line for a while, and it's like steep drop offs on both sides. I know the people who won this race like ran that section, which like is crazy to me. Like that was a hike situation for me. But yeah, and then we kind of like went down, and I knew on that downhill, I was like, this is going to be rough. It was just like a long downhill. And then at the bottom of that downhill, we ended up at the climb to go back up the peak again that we'd done the previous day. And so at this point, I'm like, all right, I know what to expect. I'm looking up and I can see that most of the snow has melted. I'm like, we're going to cruise this. This is going to be great. So same thing, like go across the ridge. Now I like know where to go a little bit. It's a little less scary stepping over like the top of the Via Ferrata bolts, like, and I'm, going up, I'm grabbing the rope, like there's almost no snow at the top anymore. So it's less slippery. And then I get to the top, there's still snow on the top. And then I realized that now I have to go over the other side of the mountain and go down. And that was rough. It was like snow-covered scree for like the top quarter. And then we get into just like loose dirt, which is like the worst thing ever to descend. I'm getting rocks in my shoes. My quads are screaming at me because it's like a really steep downhill. So that lasts forever. A lot of people pass me. Like I knew that would happen. And then at the bottom of that descent, I know that there's like one more climb. It's like shorter. And, what I had heard is that it's just on mountain bike trails. So I'm like, cool, this will be fine. We start going up this like gravel road. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I know we're going to the top of this ski slope to my left. I wish we would just go up it and like, get the climb over with. And then about 2 seconds later, we turned into the forest, and I have never seen a trail this steep. Like, it just looked like straight up. I took one look at it and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get up that. And it's just like dirt in the forest. So that was brutal. But we made it up that climb. It wasn't that long, fortunately. And then it was like a pretty mellow descent to the finish line. Yeah. So then we finished Saturday.
Wow, that is wild. Like for you to have that perspective, because like especially at this point, even just in this race, you've seen significant climbs, and to look at that and think like, how's that going to happen? That is really intense. And like I'm just curious because I haven't experienced that kind of technical climbing course. Fueling, like I'm just thinking logistic, like physically, how do you, like if you potentially need your hands to fall or grab rocks at any given second, like how are you eating and drinking? I assume you're not using poles because they probably wouldn't do much good.
Yeah, I love this question. So I did have poles. And I actually mostly wanted them for the downhills just to try to save my legs. But when I was making my nutrition plan, and this is something I do with all of my clients, I'm looking at that elevation profile. I'm doing my research to figure out where do I think I'm going to need my hands? When am I going to need my poles? And basically trying to plan my fueling, around that. So for example, like once you get on that final 1.1 miles with 2,000 feet of elevation to the summit, like I know I'm not going to be able to eat during that time because I've got my poles out, I'm cruising, like it's kind of sketchy. So just really planning ahead and making sure like, okay, if I know that section is going to take about 45 minutes, that means like I need to be fueling in the 15 minutes before that. I need to fuel as soon as I get to the summit. So just really like being strategic about where that actually happens. on sections that I know are going to be like mellower. Like quite a bit of the race was on like roads, like gravel service roads for the ski resort. And so, like on those sections, that's when it's like, okay, we're going to eat like solid foods right now. And that's when I had like a bag of pretzels and a bag of Cheez-Its just like in a belt right in front. And so every chance I got, I was like, okay, like I don't need my hands for anything. We're going to snack on some pretzels right now. And then using like gels and things that are like quicker and easier to get down for those other times where it's like, I can't really have that freedom of just like using my hands. I got to get something down really quick. And then, I think the big thing was just like practicing a lot with my poles and feeling comfortable, like putting them away and taking them out whenever I needed to, so that I could like have my hands free for eating. And then like, okay, now it's time for the poles again. Let's pull them back out.
That makes really good sense. That strategically planned, for all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, that's what makes, this is like a little bit of a tangent, but that's what makes like nutrition for trail running and like for mountain sports so much more interesting to me than it does for like road running, right? Because you run a marathon, it's like, all right, like every 30 minutes you're taking a gel. And then you just like, set that alarm on your watch, like there you go.
Just put it in your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. Which like, there's obviously challenges behind that too. Like I absolutely don't want to like, make it seem like that's easy for everybody, because it isn't. But yeah, there's just a lot less to worry about in those situations versus, on a trail, especially something that is mountainous and rugged terrain. Like there are so many more considerations.
Yeah,
absolutely. Wow. So you got through Saturday, probably feeling wrecked. Like,
not feel good.
Because like, and I think one of the things that we talk a lot about is the energy that it takes your whole self. It's not just your physical body. It's not just your quads. When you are, especially in a mountain race that is like, there's legit danger. And there's a whole different sort of level of needing to be on, right? Like you have to be fully engaged, fully cognitively present. There's a different level of full attention from your whole self needed. And that is extremely draining. It just takes so much energy.
It was a lot. And, I finished and like definitely the downhill like wrecked my quads. Like I was very worried about that. But what I spent the rest of the day really like thinking about was how much I did not want to go back the next day and do that down climb again. Like I did not want to do that. It was scary and I was dreading it. So yeah, I mean, you're spot on.
If it would have been day one again, like you just repeat that VK, would you like have felt differently? Like you just love the climbing? I mean, I know you're wrecked and tired, but like, but it's that downhill that gets you, it sounds like.
Especially that one. It was kind of
that specific one.
Yeah. Like I guess at that moment I was most concerned about the technical down climb, just like being scary and just like mentally challenging.
And that's hard, I mean, so the 50K course, is it pretty much same as what you'd run that Saturday then?
So then the entire course from Saturday, but there were a couple of sections where it would then go off and do like another loop somewhere else.
So you had that knowledge of what was coming and knowing that not only is it coming, but it's going to be a longer day.
And I'm already like exhausted and sore.
That's a lot mentally.
Yeah.
So you chose the lineup for that 50K.
I did, and it's funny because we had like a big group of friends who were out, and we had some friends who just ran like one day, but I had this one other friend who had also done the trifecta, or that's what he was doing. And he's definitely like a more experienced runner than I am. When I saw him at the finish line, like, at one point I just remember him saying like, so I might not run tomorrow. And I think that like really got to me.
On Saturday, that's what he said?
Yeah. And I was like, man, like if Sam is thinking about not starting tomorrow, like I need to consider my life.
What's the DNS rate, I wonder, after doing the first two races? Like how many people just choose not even to start that 50K?
So here's the interesting thing, and I don't know as much about the statistics for the men who do the trifecta, but so in 2023, so this was what I was looking at when I first discovered the trifecta, there were 10 women who started the whole weekend, like 10.
Wow.
I don't remember how many finished, but this year there were 15 women who started. And
That's great.
I think like
That's
10 or 12.
amazing. Like that you were one of the 15. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was 80 men. Like it's definitely like a much smaller percentage.
But still, yeah. Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean,
Just curious, do you think that the overall participation rate increased from 2023 to 24? I'm wondering if there was a sort of disproportionate jump in the number of women who participated in the trifecta, or if overall registration was really up.
I think so. So the race sells out in like 10 minutes. I know that in recent years, they've had to do some work to like kind of reroute the course so that they can have more people sign up. But I don't think that happened between 2023 and 2024. So I think it was a higher percentage of women.
That's great.
I'm really excited about. Like, I think that's awesome.
And this, like from what I saw, this is a very competitive race. Like there's cash money prize. Like Kilian Jornet is one of the people with the record.
Of course he is.
Of course he is. Like this is not a small time race. Like this is like graduate level, big deal, badass. You're a badass.
I just want to point out again, this is technically only her second 50 doing this. So just to make sure everyone's aware of that, because this is like the kind of race you do have several other mountain races under your belt. Like that's what it seems like to me. I think that's awesome that you did it. Like I think that's so cool. I love that attitude of like, you know what? Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so the end of Saturday, like you're feeling accomplished, but also wrecked, depleted, and it sounds like you got thrown off just a little bit by Tim expressing was it Tim? Sam, okay, sorry. Sam expressing sorry, Sam, if you're listening, we respect you, but it sounds like it just threw you a little bit that he was questioning his own, like he was questioning himself, and you knew that he was a much more experienced runner.
Yeah. And so I will say, like, very much to his credit, like we kind of chatted a little bit and like, we were like, complaining about stuff and basically like set this ultimatum. And he said, okay, we can talk negatively until 5 p.m. And then once 5 p.m. comes around, like we're starting this race tomorrow. It's going to be awesome. So that was super, super helpful. Okay.
So, Alyssa, like I love what Sam said to you, that like putting a boundary sometimes on, like, negative feelings come up during a race, after a race, at any point, but I really like the idea of like allowing it, but putting a boundary on it. So he said, okay, we have till 5 p.m. to bitch and complain, and then like we're in for tomorrow. Right?
Yeah, awesome. So I went to bed that night and I was like, word, like we're doing the 50K tomorrow. This is great. And then I woke up on Sunday. So as a background, this never used to happen to me, but basically once I started back to running after my injury, I started to get kind of like a nervous stomach at races. And it's the kind of thing where like I've been able to just sort of deal with it. Had a little bit of it on Saturday, for example. And what I've learned is like the bagel with peanut butter and bananas as like a pre-race breakfast, like that's not going to happen for me. So, I think on Saturday, I think I ended up like I got down a banana and then I ate a bunch of candy. And I was like, you know what, like I'm getting in calories, we're getting in carbs. Like I've kind of learned to just sort of work with it and like get down what I can, and it's fine. And like typically what happens, and this was the case on Saturday, is like as soon as I get in that start corral, I'm like, cool, we're gonna go running, like this is great, and then it all goes away and it's totally fine.
The anticipation. Yeah.
I wake up and like water is not going down. And it was like far and away the worst that this has ever been. And, and so I spent all morning, the race started at 6 a.m. So all morning is like an hour. But I spent all of that time to be like, can I drink Gatorade? Like, can I get some sort of calories in just to like get me through to when I can actually start running and like feel better and can eat more? And I think I got down 3 sips of Gatorade. Like it was,
Were you just totally nauseous and like?
Yeah. I mean, even just like standing there, like they had 6 waves and I was in like the 3rd one and then Sam was in the 1st. So like just in between like seeing him off and then just waiting for my wave, I was like, I have to stand outside. Like I feel like I'm going to vomit. Like this is
gosh.
Which is such an awful feeling.
Yeah, it was terrible. And like, if you know me, my biggest fear is legitimately throwing up. Like I have like a genuine fear of it. It is the worst thing that could possibly happen. So this whole time I'm like, this is awful. Like, how do I get through this? Sidebar, I have an appointment with a sports psychologist on Monday. So hopefully we can come up with some.
Awesome.
That's really cool that I'm glad that you're doing that.
Yeah, I've like been thinking about it for a while just because it's like very annoying, but the fact, I mean, this was like totally crippling.
Yeah.
And then what was also different about this day was like, so basically I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna like start walking because I legitimately feel so bad that running is not gonna go well. So I start the race at a walk. Not like a power walk. I'm just like cruising along this road, like just walking. And like it didn't get better. And I kept like waiting for that moment that always happens of, all right, like we're feeling good. It's just running. It's fine. And it just like didn't happen. So yeah. And it just sort of like, it was so disheartening because like I said, I was in the 3rd wave. And so I'm just walking. And then about 6 or 7 minutes later, I got passed by the entirety of the 4th wave. And then about 8 minutes after that, I got passed by the entirety of the 5th wave. And then I kind of like fell in with, kind of a pace somewhere. So that was like extremely disheartening. Like, obviously I wasn't going to win, but it also kind of sucks to just be like, oh, like I'm falling behind.
Have people like pass you in waves. Like, that's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was like, I can't do anything. So that was kind of how I got started.
Yeah.
The first aid station was, there was like a little aid that was like 5-ish miles in, and then we did like a little loop. And then like the first cutoff was 10 miles in. But basically, and then to add to all of this, I was on my period and this was like the heaviest day of it.
Oh man, I wonder if that was part of it. Yeah.
It might have been. Yeah, I don't know. So that was already like concerning. So I get to the first aid station, I like dart into the porta potty and like deal with all of that stuff. Any men listening to this, y'all are lucky that you don't have to.
Yeah.
I feel like when I have to race and I'm on my period, and again, sorry for any like male listeners that don't want to listen to us talk about our periods, but like it's a reality. It's a reality for women who have to race, and it's frustrating because I know the actual science and stuff, it's like technically, when you're on your period, there's no performance, like nothing that could like physiologically, like you can perform technically at that time. But for me, my stomach gets messed up when I'm on my period. Like I don't struggle with like what you have experienced, like with that, like pre-race, like having a hard time getting things down. Like I'm actually eating breakfast in the morning is pretty good, but when I'm on my period, it's so hard to eat and fuel during races. Like it just messes my stomach up for some reason. So like I can imagine adding that to that would just be like, if you're already feeling crummy, that's awful.
Yeah. And it was, oh my gosh, just thinking about, men and like broaching this topic. It was so funny because I did get to an aid station later in the day, and there was this like middle-aged man volunteering, and he came over and he was like, what can I get for you? And I was like, oh, like, it's just like not a great day, but it's fine. And he was like, are you cramping? Do you need pickle juice? And I was like, well, it's kind of like a different kind of cramping. Like I was trying to give him a way out. And then like after I said that, he was like, oh, well,
he really wanted to help you.
Yeah, he was like, well, I'm going to leave now. And I was like, Like, thanks. Like dealing with those logistics. I was kind of like, I don't know how long I'm going to make it today. Like, this is not going to be great. I ended up like falling in with this woman who's like from Montana, like right after I had my first porta potty stop. And ended up kind of like she told me she like works for search and rescue. Like she's more of a hiker than a runner, and she was just kind of out there trying to see how far she could make it. And I was like, cool, like I'll hang out with you. Chatted with her for a while. Like it definitely like helped the spirits a little bit. But by the time we swung around to that like 10-mile like cutoff aid station, I was like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't know. So I like sat down for a minute. And then this is like the silliest thing ever. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, what should I do? And then the aid station starts playing a Kesha song. And I was like, all right, like I'll keep going. Like
They had the right music playing.
because like, so in between that aid station and the next aid station, so the next aid was the one at the base of like the climb to the top of the ski mountain. So in between that, I had to do that like giant scree field traverse, climb up to the ridge, scary down climb. Like it was 8 miles away. Like I knew that was going to take like a couple of hours at that point with like how slow I was moving. So like that was kind of a struggle.
For a 50K to have aid stations 8 miles apart, like especially in that kind, like this is slow move. This is probably a slower moving race. Like that's a little bit far apart. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think it took me like over 3 hours to get in between those two aids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I kind of figured, I was like, well, I'll keep going. And like, worst case scenario, like I am just on a ski mountain. Like I can just find a service road somewhere and just like bail if I need to. So, I keep going. The down climb was like a little less scary, but what was awesome was like, on Saturday, I was like solid mid pack. This day I was like back of the pack. Like it was the coolest vibe because everyone was just like in it together, like supporting each other. We got to that scary down climb and I'm apologizing to everyone. They're like, you're good. This shit's scary. Like take your time. Kinder than the people on Saturday had been who were just like trying to pass me in a sketchy way.
Gotta love that back of the pack vibe.
It was really nice, honestly, until, I mean, I think there's some vibe of like everyone is just on their own like silent private death march. But like the camaraderie was really cool. Like there was one point when we were all kind of like in a line and someone called back like, how are we doing on time? Are we going to make the next cutoff? And I was like, oh, this is really sweet.
That's my group there. I hang out with those people. We're the ones like, how much time do we have till the next cutoff? Yeah, we just find each other and band together.
Honestly, like I think, being able to like talk with people who like, we were all kind of in it together, like that really kind of helped with my morale. And like at this point, by the way, I think I've managed to get in like 1 gel per hour. Like it's not good.
I was wondering about that. Yeah. Ooh.
Like I went in like, and on Saturday, I think I hit like 80 grams of carbs per hour. And this day I was at like maybe 30. Like it was not good.
Which is not enough.
No.
Yeah. Especially if you started it. I'm sure, obviously you started in a deficit.
Right.
Yeah.
For like 3 days and like, I'm not getting anything for breakfast. Like, so that was kind of in the back of my mind. I was like, like I'm doing okay. Like my uphill legs still feel really good, but like, I really don't want to reach a point where like I have dug myself into such a deep hole that now I am going to like start vomiting and like have like really, really severe GI issues. So basically like the whole way down, there was like, a descent and then you kind of like go around a little bit and then you get to that aid station right before the big climb. And so, basically I spend that entire time just being like, what am I doing? Like, what should I do? And I passed on an uphill because of course I passed this like older gentleman and I just came up behind him and I was like, how's it going? And he was like, we start chatting and he's telling me about how he's having kind of a rough day and I was like, yeah, you and me both. And he just looks at me and he goes, are you having fun? And I was like, I've been trying to figure that out for the last 7 hours. That's a good question. And thought about that for a little while and came into the next aid station and I had my partner and my friend who were both there. And I like got my drop bag and I sat down and I was talking to them for a little while. And they were like, well, I think you've got it. They're going through the whole like, well, you've got this much time to make the next cutoff. And then after that, it's downhill. and you've got, this much time. But literally like the last downhill that I'd had to do to get into that aid station, like my legs like would not even let me run. Like my quads were screaming at me. My toes felt bad. I was like, this just doesn't feel good. And I know that at the top of the ski hill down the other side is that terrible climb, or that terrible descent that I did yesterday that was just like loose and like wrecked my quads yesterday. Like it's not going to go well. It's not going to be fast. It's going to be miserable. So, I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't know, like maybe like I'll drop out here. And then I had this thought and I was like, you know what, like my uphill legs feel good. Like I'm going to go to the top of the ski hill. Like I'm going to, go up Bone Crusher Ridge for the third time and like, go do that. I'm going to take the tram down and like, that sounds good. Like, and then I, get to do most of the uphill for the day and then get to skip that terrible descent and like, and then I get to skip that like horrible straight up climb through the woods at the end. Like, I don't know, like I think it'll be okay. So like kept going, and my friend and my partner are still like, no, I think you got this. Just like, take your stuff and like, go to the top and then like you can decide up there. And I was like, no, it's good. Like I'll leave my drop bag with you. Like this is what feels good to me. So I climbed up the ski hill for the third day in a row. It's awesome. Like I felt good. I was still like passing people, but really good. And then I got to the aid station at the summit and I was like, okay, like what do you need? And I was like, who do I talk to about riding the tram down? And he looks at me and he's like, but you're doing awesome. Like he like couldn't comprehend that like I'm just like kind of done. Like I'm ready to go down. I don't really want to do this descent on the other side. So yeah. And then I got to ride the tram down, which I think is like a really good way to like DNF in style.
Wow. I mean, first of all, like, wow, congratulations on putting yourself out there and persevering on day 3 as long as you did. And I love that you were like, I love that you did that last uphill climb.
Yeah.
Like, because you knew you could.
And that's the part that you love. You got to like end in joy. Like, even though it was like a rough day, you weren't feeling great. Like to end with something you loved. And like, that's more meaningful of a finish than quitting when you're feeling miserable and sad at the aid station.
Yeah. And I spent a lot of hours that morning trying to decide, like, going through my head and saying, okay, I think I can probably finish. Like realistically, I made it to mile like 21. Like, it's 10 miles to go. It's mostly downhill at that point. Like I can probably finish, but like, if I do, what am I doing it for? Like, it's not going to be a good time. I'm not going to enjoy it. So if I keep going, it's because of this like ego thing of like wanting to finish. And that's not really me. Like it never really has been. Like I've always been that person where like I'll get halfway up like a climb when I'm out like rock climbing. And if it's not fun, I'll just come back down because I don't really feel like doing it. Like, so, the finish for the sake of finishing just doesn't really vibe with me. And I think in a race setting, it's still really easy to get caught up in that mindset of like, okay, I got to do the thing.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, I spent literally 7 hours trying to decide, like, is it worth it? So yeah, I think finishing on top where I was happy. One of the like aid station volunteers take a picture of me at the summit and she was like, well, you don't look like you're in pain at all. And I was like, no, like that climb was cool.
It's so interesting, and I can relate to what you just said so much, and I'm guessing Heidi can too. It's kind of like, I just love that you were aware of the connection with the ego and how much that can trip us up. And to see it and to know that you need to let go of that and just be true to yourself. Like it's like, look, I know that physically, yes, I could get this done, but what for? Like, who am I proving? I don't need to prove myself to anyone. It's kind of like, I am enough and this is badass.
Yeah. And I think like, especially in, the world of social media, that's like a really hard thing to make peace with because, it's not as sexy to be like, hey, I DNF'd this race than it is to be like, hey, I finished. Like they gave us this really cool, I have it next to me, although it's still kind of in bubble wrap, but like as sort of our gift for doing the trifecta, we got this really cool, like wooden, I know on the podcast, nobody can see this, but it's this like wooden thing. And then
Beautiful.
every day that you finished a race, you got your little medal and it fits in
Okay.
like just like that. So like the idea is
Oh my God, that's so cool.
That's neat.
private for people who aren't watching, but like there's my 28K one. So they fit in to like these little slots so that like all of your medals definitely fit into like your plaque. Yeah, and so I spent a lot of time, especially in like the week after the race, being like, well, now my stupid plaque only has 2 medals that are put into it. It's got this like empty space. But like it literally doesn't matter. Like I can put like a picture in the top or like it's symmetrical.
The
like
picture of you at the summit on that last thing. Just cut it out and put it in there.
I love that idea.
I think I just my friend and she's a client of mine too. I had trained her. She was just running her first 50 miler and it was a tight timeline on this 50 miler. It was a 12-hour cutoff. She's on a more back of the pack side, so we knew it was going to be tight going into it. But she spent so much of the race, you know, obsessing over the time and how much time she had and how much per mile. And she was getting really discouraged and called me, you know, upset, like, you know, 20 miles in and is like, I don't think I'm going to make this time today. I don't think I can like make it. I don't know, like, should I just like quit now? And I said, don't quit now. I said, stop looking at your watch about the time and just do what you can. Like, let all the time stuff go because maybe you'll make it and maybe you won't, but what does it matter? Just go out there and be the person that I know you are on the trail. And that's a smiley, happy, dancing, fun person, and just carry on. And she did. And she made it to, I think she made it to 40 miles and then she called it. But she felt so, story and yours resonate with me so much because it was like a matter of ending the race on like a high note versus ending the race in like a discouraged, like frustrated spot. Like she knew she probably wasn't going to make the time. However, she decided to keep going anyway after some encouragement and ended up having a really fun day out there and like ending with a smile and like, and I think that's such a more powerful way to DNF than to end in like a low spot where you're upset. Like I think sometimes people, if they lose their goal or they know they're not going to make cutoffs, it's easy to just make that excuse and like quit earlier. If you just, in your case, knew you were going to probably stop, you could have just called it there at the aid station. But to like take that extra step and be like, no, I'm going to find some joy and then like still end this day on like a high, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I think, you know, racing can be fun. I mean, I will say like the vibes at the Rut were like impeccable. Like I recommend. There's a lot of benefit to that, but I think it is really easy to lose sight of like why we even are out there in the first place and why we even do any of this. Like I know for me, you know, kind of coming back into running post injury from more of this like, you know, hiking, mountaineering, like, you know, just outdoorsy kind of perspective, like, you know, in a lot of ways, I really prefer just going out and doing a big day on my own because it takes away from a lot of that like stress and just all of the things that come with a race that like, you know, maybe kind of take you away from like why you're even doing it in the first place.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that, I think, is those expectations, those kind of external expectations that sometimes do get tangled up with the race format. Like if you go out and just do a 50K fun run just to do it, it's just you. It's on your own terms. It's, you know, it's entirely yours.
How did you do in the time? Like, I know you ended that day feeling good and having fun, but like in the post like race, you go home, was it like a mental struggle with the DNF or had you like already kind of made some peace with it and felt pretty good about it?
I waffled on it for about a week. And I kept having these thoughts of like, did I do the right thing? Like, should I have just pushed through and done it anyway? And I think ultimately, like, I made the right call. Like, could I have finished? Probably, but it wouldn't have been a good time. Like my, nutrition was not in a good place. Like that absolutely would have caught up with me. Like, yeah. So
I'm amazed you made it through 7 hours and got up that last uphill.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
I'm very much amazed by that. But yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of kept waffling on it for like a week. And, and at that point, it's like, literally, it doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do about it. And I do wonder how much of that just kind of stems from this like weird, like social media thing where it's like, yeah, we're sort of expected to go out and like do the thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I can relate to that too. I had my very first DNF in August, and it was very similar in the decision process. And I know I made the right call, but then that kind of that waffly feeling, it's like
I feel like the farther away you get from the race too, it's easy to convince yourself you were in a different state and could have, as you're feeling better post race, like I've experienced that, like, oh, I could have kept going. I should have kept going. And then I think back, no, you made that decision.
Let's really look at this.
Reason. And in that moment, should you have really kept going in that moment? Probably not. And so like it's that like the farther away you get from it, your memory distorts a little bit about like what was actually happening with you, and you have to kind of bring yourself back to that moment and that decision to kind of help validate it. But you're right, it's like that social media, like I should have done it because then I could have said I did it, like, and
yeah.
Alyssa, you had a post after that race that I loved, and it was a friend of yours that suggested that we reach out to you and see if you'd be willing to come on the show, your friend Amy. And when Heidi and I first heard about your race and we saw that post, we were like, done deal. We got to talk to her. We have to talk to her. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about just sort of your processing and your perspective about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and a big part of why I made that post was because I wanted to, kind of normalize that, like, you don't have to have this super clear, like, well, I was vomiting and like couldn't continue on. Like your reason to DNF doesn't have to be that. Like any reason, if you decide to not continue, like that's valid. And I think, helping to normalize that. I also just really wanted to have, start a conversation around like, why are we even doing this? Like, why are we specifically glorifying pushing through so much grit? I mean, I think this is something that comes up in ultra running so often of, this idea of like, well, like I, broke my ankle in the middle of the race, but I finished anyway. And like that person now gets all of this praise for having a ton of grit when like, in reality, like, yes, mentally they must be very strong, but like they also are just doing damage to their body. Like, and I just think, there's a lot of that in ultra running. My partner, shout out Garrett, who will never listen to this. He DNF'd the Leadville 100 this year. And it was kind of a similar thing. Like he was having some issues, like just not being able to keep stuff down, but it wasn't this like, horrible, like he cannot continue at all situation. And so, yeah, I think that's just kind of been on my mind. And I definitely thought about that a lot when I was kind of processing my experience, that like it, we often hear about, if like somebody got rhabdo and they had to drop out, and like that's considered like an okay reason to DNF.
Right.
But, well, I just wasn't having fun and didn't feel like it is somehow like not okay.
Yeah, you wrote in that, I found that post because I was remembering Michelle and I looking at it, and you said, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to DNF, just a culture that makes us think there is. And I think that's kind of just a good point for people to take away from this, is like, there's so many different reasons to DNF. And yeah.
Well, and like we readily accept that we all have so many different reasons why we race and why we
Right.
sign up for it, right? So like we should also be more accepting of having a lot of different reasons for why we finish. Like it's interesting.
Such a good point. Yeah, like, you know, because there are people who race to win, there are people who race to get PRs, like there are people who race to challenge themselves. I think that was sort of the boat that I fell into, was like, you know, just doing something that sounded cool and hard. And like I think I was successful in finding
You got
that.
it.
Oh my God, yeah. Like I don't think I could have done what you did like without a prolonged significant training.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Another thing that you had written, we send our little pre-show questionnaire. One of the quotes that I pulled out was that you meant about how ultra running culture puts too much emphasis on grit and not enough on fun. And I think, you know, like it is really interesting. And I love the way you wanted to start a conversation about that and like keep conversation going because it is such a fine line. And there's so, you know, like I talk about grit all the time, like all the time. And there's a lot of good reason to talk about grit and perseverance and all these like stick with itness kind of aspects that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that help in these really tough endurance endeavors. But at the same time, there is this fine line and this delicate balance that it's also personal. It is all so individual to each of us for why we choose to do these things, why we choose to see them through or not, how things go on any given day. And sometimes, like Heidi and I often talk about how we need to just not take it so damn seriously all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a time for that pushing, you know,
Yeah.
and that pushing past the discomfort, pushing past the pain, pushing past the mentality of like really wanting to quit. And then there's also a time and place to say, you know what? No, I'm good. I kind of set out what I came to do and I challenged myself, but now is time to pull the plug. And I really think that we only are the only ones who can personally judge that for ourselves. Like, so it may not be like social media sexy to say you DNF'd when it looked like you could have kept going, but we're our own personal judge of that. And we know what's best for us in that moment because, you know, there may come a day where a race like that comes and you're in a similar situation and you decide today's the day I'm going to power through and finish it. But
Yeah.
that's just your own personal journey. And, you know, you kind of never really know until you're there and you know, if that
Right.
makes any sense. I said, you know, a lot, but
You know, but and I think it's interesting, like I think it's so important to recognize and appreciate that everyone has different goals. And, you know, even when you go out just on a regular run, like somebody might look at my run from this morning and be like, dang, that like she's so slow. Look how long it took. And I'm like, you don't know what my goals for today were. Like you don't
yeah.
know what I've been doing or what's coming up. And it's the exact same for a race. And I think we something that's come up in talking with a lot of folks is recognizing that, you know, Alyssa, for you, your goal was to do something really hard and really badass, to do those uphills, to like get that experience. Somebody's goal signing up for a huge race might simply be like to see the top of a particular mountain and get to look at that viewpoint. For me, sometimes my goals literally might be to eat as much as I possibly can and say hello to everyone.
Love that.
And
Yeah.
if I can do that and have a really good time, I feel like that's enough for that day. You know, like
Yeah. Yeah. And I
it's
think like being, you know, spending some time like with the back of the pack really like opened my eyes to a lot of those different possibilities. Like I ran with this guy from Texas. We kind of like leapfrogged each other for like most of the day. And he had told me this was his third time attempting the 50K. And every year he makes it a little bit further before he gets cut off. And, you know, and I thought that was really cool. And he did, by the way, he made it to the last aid station this year. So he made it further than
Oh, wow.
he had in the
that's
past.
awesome.
Yeah, and like I think that's so cool. Like, yeah, some people their goal is to finish, some people their goal is to have fun, some people their goal is to make it further than they did last year. And yeah, the only person who can determine if, what that goal is, but also like if that is a success or a failure is you. Unless like your
Yeah.
goal is to win, and then obviously like there's other people determining.
Alyssa,
love
do
that.
you have anything coming up on your schedule? I know you had said that you'd be interested in doing more like VKs, like what you had done.
Yeah, I think that's so kind of like my same group of friends that did the rut. We're looking at a sort of similar situation in Canada next year.
Ooh.
Actually is going to be a little bit easier because it's like the VK and then the 50K. And then the last day is like a half marathon and it's not as hilly, which I think seems
That makes sense.
a little more doable. But yeah, I'm like very, very stoked on like doing more VKs. I have a very silly like kind of route that I'm planning on doing in a couple of weeks that kind of like circumnavigates the town that I live in and like links all of the parks.
That's
Oh,
not
cool.
silly at all. That
That's
sounds like
awesome.
fun.
I'm excited. I mean, I think, that's like what I mentioned earlier. Like I generally am like more driven by like days like that than like
Mhm.
a
Yep.
situation. Excited to do that. And then, yeah, I don't know. Like other than that, I haven't really quite figured out what the move is, but yeah, very much interested in like really doing more BK, like uphill type stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I feel like the one that I hear about the most in the US is the Broken Arrow.
Yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah. Because that also has a series, right?
Yeah, I think they call it like the Triple Crown, but it's a very similar situation. I don't love going to California, so that hasn't been on my radar. No offense to any Californians listening. It's just like not really my favorite place to go.
I love, like, and you get to choose. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Alyssa, where can people find you on Instagram? Like I know people might be interested in looking up your like coaching, like nutrition coaching business. If you could share that info with us, and we'll be sure to put it in the show notes too.
Yeah. So my Instagram is at Alyssa_outside_RD. And then Alyssa is spelled ALYSSA because of the way that it is. And then it's the easiest way to get in touch, but then you can also look at my website at peak2peaknutrition.com.
Awesome.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like this was a really good conversation that'll kind of make folks think about that line between, pushing and, the choices that we have to make in those situations, and kind of bring us all back to the joy and fun that is supposed to be had out there.
Yeah.
Supposed to be.
Congratulations on what you accomplished, because it's really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I hope that, if anything, this encourages some other women to get out there and try hard things, even if they, even if there is a possibility that you don't finish, because we just need to get more women on the starting line of doing these hard things. I heard, actually, this is a really interesting like statistic that I heard, but I heard that women are less likely to sign up for ultras because they also have a lower DNF rate. So basically what that means is that like women are less likely than men to do things that they might not do or that they might not finish, which is super interesting. So we see like a much higher DNF rate in men who, for whatever reason are more likely to go out and like take that risk. So
I'm doing my part to change that statistic.
Stop. But totally anecdotally, like I have looked at a number of different races because I'm always curious about the participation rate of women versus men. And it's appallingly low percentages of women registrants in most of the ultras, and a lot of them that I have done. But when you look afterwards, proportionately, the women have a lower DNF rate in like every race and this is totally anecdotal. But like I feel like that makes a lot of sense just based on what I have noticed in races that I've done.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense based on what I know about women.
But I love it. Let's get more women out there.
Absolutely.
Stand at the start line doing hard
Let's
things.
get 20 plus at the Rut Trifecta
Yes.
next year.
I
That
won't
would be
be
awesome.
there, but maybe in 2 years.
Okay. That's still cool. It's
Fair
growing
enough.
each year, though. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Alyssa,
Well, thank
you so much.
Yeah, thank you both. This has been awesome.
Yes, thank you. And that wraps up our show today. Thank you, Alyssa. We'll link all of her stuff in the show notes for you guys. So be sure to give her a follow, check her out, leave us a review, comment, all the things that help us out. Your support is what keeps us going. And yeah, just in the meantime, remember to stay curious and embrace the challenges. Stopping. We appreciate your support so much. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tag us on our Instagram at Let's Run That Again and give us a shout out when you listen. And as always, we welcome feedback from you and are open to ideas and guests for future episodes. Reach out on our Instagram or email us at let'srunthatagainpod@gmail.com.